Hi there. Tonight we drift into ancient Sumer, as if you are walking barefoot along cool river mud, while the last oil lamps tremble in doorways, and you can almost taste the damp air that rises off the canals like a slow exhale from the earth itself. You are here for history for sleep, so we are going to keep our steps gentle and our voice low, because some parts are widely accepted history. Some parts are interpretation, and some parts are calm. What if imagination, the kind you can let float by like a reed boat on quiet water? The evidence we do have points to real cities, real irrigation, real scribes, and real floods, and historians debate the details of specific stories, names, and timelines. Also, you probably won't survive this. Not in the dramatic way, just in the very real way of you falling asleep halfway through and waking up with a phone-shaped mark on your cheek like an ancient royal seal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me where you're listening from and your local time. Because I love imagining this river world stretching out across the night in all the different time zones. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into a city that feels both busy and hushed. The way a place feels when it has learned a routine so well it can do it in near silence. Most historians agree that southern Mesopotamia, the land later called Sumer, grows into a network of city-states supported by rivers and canals, with names that still sound like stones clicking together. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu. In the night air, you catch smoke from cooking fires. A little fishy, a little sweet, and under it the steady scent of wet clay. The houses cluster close, walls of mud brick holding on to the day's heat, and you can hear a distant splash where someone rinses a jar at the canal's edge. You walk slowly, second person slow, sleepwalk slow, but the city around you keeps its rhythm. A donkey snorts, a dog pads by and looks at you like you owe it rent. Somewhere a baby fusses, then settles. On a rooftop, a breeze stirs reed mats, and the sound is soft enough to be a lullaby. You pass a narrow alley where a lamp throws a small circle of light, and within that circle you see the daily miracle of Sumer. Clay turned into memory. A scribe sits cross-legged near a doorway. A young man with a patient face and hands stained darker by wet clay, and he presses a reed stylus into a tablet with tiny taps that sound like rain on a roof. Archaeology suggests that writing in Mesopotamia begins for practical reasons like accounting, and the earliest tablets often track grain, animals, labor, and rations. That is the documented anchor, the firm ground, the part you can put your feet on. Still, one interpretation is that even the driest lists can carry a mood, because the shape of what gets counted tells you what a society worries about. Tonight, the mood you pick up is subtle, like the way a room feels different when someone has decided to leave, even before they say it out loud. You drift closer to the canal, because water is always the first storyteller in this place. The canal is not wild like a mountain stream. It is guided, disciplined, held in place by banks and careful angles. The evidence we do have points to sophisticated irrigation systems, with canals feeding fields and gardens, and with communities organizing labor to maintain them. In the dark, the canal reflects a line of stars, trembling with every ripple. You listen, and you start to notice a tiny difference. A sound that is not panic, but preparation, like the gentle clink of pottery being stacked, the muffled thump of bundles tied with rope. Most historians agree that Sumerian cities are built around temples and their economic networks, with priests and administrators managing storehouses and fields. You can almost feel the temple presence, even without seeing it yet. A gravity in the city's layout. People move with the awareness that the gods aren't just far away in the sky. They are embedded in the walls, the schedules, the grain bins. And yet, the night has its own authority. Night can make even organized people do quiet, strange things. You turn a corner and the temple rises ahead, a mass of brick and shadow, stepped and broad, not necessarily the towering ziggurat shape you might picture from later eras, but still a platform of power. A few lamps burn at the entrance, and their light makes the bricks look like honey. You smell bitumen somewhere nearby, that dark, tar-like substance used for waterproofing. Archaeology suggests bitumen is used widely in the region for sealing baskets, coating boats, strengthening walls on solid ground. That is just practical chemistry. In the misty zone, it's possible that a smell can become a signal, like the scent of rain before rain arrives. You walk near a storehouse wall, and you hear the soft scrape of clay stoppers being set into jars. Inside, grain sits like sleep itself, piled and waiting. Most historians agree that grain is life here, and that controlling it is a form of governance. One interpretation is that sudden shifts in how grain is gathered or rationed could reflect stress, like drought, conflict, or flooding. If we treat it as a possibility, rather than a conclusion, you can let a gentle what-if settle into your mind. What if these jars are not just being sealed for storage, but being sealed for travel? A woman passes you with a basket balanced on her hip, and she does not look frightened. That matters. The people you see are not running. They are not screaming. There is no dramatic torchlight chase scene, no cinematic chorus. There is simply a strange quietness, a deliberate calm, like a household that has practiced leaving in its imagination until it feels like any other chore. You step toward the river itself, beyond the canal, where the water is wider and darker and less obedient. The river is a living thing, and most historians agree that Mesopotamian life depends on rivers that can both nourish and destroy, because they flood, they shift channels, they break banks, they deposit silt, they erase boundaries. Flooding is documented, and in fact, the broad cultural memory of flood events is one reason flood stories become so widespread in the region. But historians still argue whether any single legendary flood narrative corresponds to one specific event, or whether these stories blend many floods into one unforgettable shape. You let that debate sit where it belongs, in the middle ground between solid history and story, and you keep walking. Near the waterline, you see boats, not necessarily grand vessels, more like practical rivercraft, low and sturdy, some made with reeds and coated in bitumen, others wooden where wood can be afforded or acquired. The evidence we do have points to river transport being common, because rivers are the highways of this flat land. You watch a man testing a rope, tugging it twice, then knotting it with the calm focus of someone tying his sandal. Another person checks a basket, lifts it, sets it down, adjusts the weight. No one is making speeches, no one is proclaiming doom. This is the feeling of a silent evacuation, if such a thing could exist, not as a confirmed event, but as a mood you can explore without insisting it is the only truth. You glance back at the city. The lamps still glow, the walls still stand. Dogs still wander as if they own the streets, which, to be fair, they probably do. But something is changing in the air, and it is not just the temperature dropping. It is the sense that someone, somewhere, has decided to stop arguing with the river and start negotiating with it. You move through a small marketplace area where stalls are folded down for the night. A few clay cups are stacked, a few woven mats rolled. A potter's workshop smells like damp earth and smoke. You notice fewer loose objects than you would expect, fewer casual piles, fewer things left out. One interpretation is that an organized society can keep tidy anyway. But another interpretation, a softer one, is that tidiness can be a form of readiness. What if the city has been quietly practicing, like a family that always keeps its important papers in one place, just in case? You pause beside a low wall and look at the sky. Stars are sharp here, not blurred by modern light, and they hang over the flat land like bright nails hammered into dark wood. Most historians agree that Mesopotamians pay close attention to the sky, reading patterns and omens, though the formal astronomical texts come later. Still, even in early periods, the night sky is part of how people think. A careful reading might suggest that watching the heavens is not only spiritual, but also practical, because it gives a rhythm, a calendar, a sense of timing. If you let imagination step in gently, you can picture a priest on a roof, counting stars, not because he wants to impress anyone, but because he is trying to decide whether the season feels wrong. You hear a soft cough and see an older man sitting by a doorway, eyes half-lidded, as if he is already half asleep. He watches you without surprise, like he has seen strangers in dreams before. In his hands, he turns a small object, maybe a seal stone, maybe a token, something smooth with edges worn by years of touch. Seals are a documented part of Mesopotamian administration, used to mark ownership and authorize transactions. On solid ground, that's bureaucracy. In the mist, it's also identity. And what if identity is what you clutch when everything else becomes uncertain? You keep walking and you notice a line of people moving toward the river, spaced out. Not a crowd, more like a trickle, like water itself choosing a path. They carry bundles wrapped in cloth, baskets tied with reed rope, a few clay tablets carefully tucked into cases. The idea of tablets traveling is not far-fetched, because records are valuable, and a society that depends on organized distribution would want to preserve its accounts. Still, the scene stays in the realm of interpretation. It's possible you are witnessing normal nightly transport, a routine shipment, an ordinary movement of goods, and yet the quietness feels intentional, and the night feels like it is holding its breath. A small joke floats through your sleepy mind, because your brain likes to keep you humble, and you think, imagine being the person who forgets the one important thing, like, oh no, I packed the grain, the baby, and the sacred seal, but I left the sandals. And then you picture a Sumerian citizen tiptoeing back through the gate whispering, nobody look at me, I just need my sandals. And the dog is like, I will absolutely look at you. I am a professional looker. You let the joke pass, because the point is not comedy. The point is comfort. The sense that people in the past were human enough to be quietly ridiculous. Just like you. You come closer to the edge of the river, and the sound of water deepens. There is a pull to it, an ancient authority. Most historians agree that floods shape settlement patterns, because people rebuild, relocate, adapt, and sometimes abandon sites. Archaeology suggests that some layers at Mesopotamian sites show evidence of flood deposits, though the extent and timing vary by location. This is where you keep the solid ground separate from the mist. Floods happen, flood memories spread, stories form. That part is stable. The silent evacuation idea is not stable, not documented as a single confirmed event. It is a possibility, a way to read the mood of preparation through the lens of later stories that talk about warnings, instructions, and survival. A popular rumor claims that ancient texts hide secret messages about disasters. But we do not need to treat rumor as fact to enjoy the puzzle. We're not proving anything tonight. We're following clues. You watch as someone steps onto a boat and steadies it with a pole. The boat creaks softly, like an old floorboard. A child is lifted in, not crying, just sleepy. Someone hands over a bundle. Another person checks the bitumen seams with a thumb, like testing bread for freshness. The movements are calm, and you realize that calm can be the most haunting kind of urgency. If danger were immediate, there would be shouting. Calm suggests planning. You turn your head and listen for the city's heart, the temple, the workshops, the alleyways. The city is still there, still alive, but it is thinning, like smoke. And you think about how information moves in a world without loudspeakers or mass texts. News travels by mouth, by gesture, by hint. One interpretation is that leaders, priests, or elders could guide people with coded language, perhaps framed as ritual instruction. Another interpretation is simpler. People know the river, and when it feels wrong, they do what their grandparents taught them. The wind shifts, and you smell something new, a faint sourness that could be algae, or mud disturbed upstream. Your imagination wants to turn it into a sign, but you keep your tone cautious. It's possible, not certain. This is suggestive, not conclusive. You take a few steps back from the water, and you notice how the shore is marked by footprints, many of them pointing the same way. That detail feels small, but it lodges in your mind like a pebble. You picture the river rising, not dramatically, but steadily, soaking low ground, pushing into fields, filling canals beyond their capacity. Most historians agree that the Tigris and Euphrates system can flood unpredictably, and that managing water is both a technical and social challenge. Tonight, you are watching the social part. People moving because the water might not be negotiable anymore. Another little joke comes, because your mind is trying to keep the tension soft. You think about the bureaucrat who insists on paperwork, even at the riverbank. Like, yes, we are evacuating quietly. But please press your seal here, initial here, and confirm you are bringing exactly 3 goats, not 2.5 goats, because half a goat is a different form entirely. You imagine everyone nodding politely, because nobody wants to argue with paperwork at midnight. The joke fades, and the river remains. You look up again at the stars. They feel steady in a way the water does not. You breathe in, slow and deep, and the night breathes with you. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is that Sumer is real. Its cities are real. Its irrigation is real. Its writing is real. And floods are real. The interpreted part is that patterns of storage, transport, and social organization might hint at how people prepare for crises. The imagined part is this quiet procession, this almost ceremonial silence. The idea that a whole community could move in the dark like a practiced dream. You walk alongside the boats as they push off, one by one, not in a dramatic armada, more like a slow unthreading. Poles dip. Water shivers. Reeds whisper against hulls. The sound is so soft it could be mistaken for the fan in your room, that steady background hum you set to sleep by. You keep your steps slow, your shoulders loose, your jaw unclenched. You let the night do what it does best. Turn history into a gentle corridor you can drift through without needing to solve every mystery. And as the last lamp reflections break on the river's surface, you feel the questions settle in, not as a claim, but as a calm curiosity. What if the story is pointing at something else? The night carries you to a quieter quarter, where the buildings lean close together, and the air smells less like river mud and more like warm dust and baked brick. Somewhere nearby, a fire pops softly, not a big blaze, just a cook's coals settling into red embers. And the sound feels like punctuation in a sentence you are trying to read with sleepy eyes. You move past a doorway where a lamp is shaded with a thin cloth, and the light turns honey-colored and gentle, like the city is trying not to wake itself up. You find the scribal space by following a sound that is almost nothing, the tiny tap of reed into clay, the soft scrape of a smoothing tool, the occasional breath someone takes when they are concentrating. Most historians agree that scribes in Mesopotamia become essential to administration, trade, and temple economies, because once you can record what comes in and what goes out, you can build a city that remembers itself. Archaeology suggests that clay tablets preserve everything from inventories to hymns, from legal disputes to school exercises. The evidence we do have points to writing that begins practical and grows expressive, like a tool that starts as a hammer and ends up playing music. Inside a small room, you see stacked tablets drying on a shelf. Some are palm-sized and plain. Others are larger and neatly ruled with lines. A young apprentice sits nearby, lips moving, as he repeats signs under his breath, like he is rehearsing a spell, except it is a spell for counting sheep and measuring barley. He looks up at you, blinks slowly, then goes back to his work, because in this world, a stranger drifting through the night is either a dream or a messenger, and neither one should interrupt your homework. You step closer to a table where a more senior scribe works on a tablet that is different from the usual grain and goat routine. The signs are arranged with a kind of ceremonial neatness. A careful reading might suggest this tablet belongs to a category that later scholars call lists, genealogies, or king records, the kind of writing that organizes power by organizing memory. What's broadly accepted is that Mesopotamian societies develop king lists and dynastic traditions, and that scribes sometimes arrange rulers in sequences that teach legitimacy as much as they report history. This is solid ground mixed with interpretation, because the lists exist. But why they are structured the way they are is a question with soft edges. You watch the scribe press the stylus in a measured rhythm, and you sense that he is not just writing names. He is building a ladder, rung by rung, from the present into a past that feels almost mythical. Some entries might be closer to real rulers and real cities. Others might stretch time into enormous spans that feel impossible by modern standards. One interpretation is that these long reigns are symbolic, meant to communicate greatness or cosmic order rather than literal years. Another interpretation is that early chronology is simply messy, blended, and hard to verify. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. Still, your sleepy mind loves a pattern, and it notices that symbolic time can behave like a code even when nobody intended it that way. You let a thought drift in carefully, labeled as possibility, not certainty. It's possible that a list full of huge numbers also serves as a memory device, like a chant, like a sequence you can repeat until it sticks. And what if, in a more cinematic mood, certain numbers become a kind of clock? Not a clock that ticks loudly, but a clock that whispers. The scribe pauses and rubs his thumb along the edge of the tablet, smoothing a corner. He reaches for water, wets his fingers, and corrects a sign with a gentle swipe. You notice how many tools are here that feel simple and yet powerful. Reed stylus, bowl of water, lump of clay, string for measuring lines, seal stone for authority. In a world where most people do not write, writing becomes a quiet form of control. Most historians agree that literacy is specialized, and that scribes train for years. The evidence we do have points to scribal schools, copying exercises, and the gradual standardization of signs. Tonight, you can almost hear the pressure of that training in the scribe's slow breathing. A small joke floats by, because your brain likes to keep things human. You imagine the apprentice complaining, softly and respectfully, like, "Yes, teacher. I understand the fate of the kingdom depends on accurate accounting, but my hand is tired, and this clay is judging me." And the teacher just gives that ancient look that says, "The clay is always judging you." You smile in your mind and keep moving. A doorway opens, and a temple administrator steps in, carrying a small basket with tablets wrapped in cloth. He sets them down with care, as if they are eggs. The basket has a faint smell of bitumen, not enough to be overpowering. Just a reminder that sealing and waterproofing are common concerns in a land shaped by water. He speaks quietly with the scribe, and you catch words about deliveries, allocations, and something that sounds like a list of names. The tone is not dramatic, it is managerial, and that is exactly why it feels important. Most historians agree that institutions, especially temples and palaces, coordinate labor and resources, and that they rely on records to do it. One interpretation is that when a society feels environmental stress, records can change in subtle ways, more emphasis on rations, more detail about storage, more precision about who owes what. It's possible that a rising sense of uncertainty makes administrators cling harder to the comfort of counting. You look at one of the wrapped bundles, and your imagination does what it always does at night. It turns ordinary objects into symbols. A bundle of tablets becomes portable memory. A list of names becomes a roster for who matters when things get difficult. A sealed jar becomes a question mark. To be clear, this is debated, and the scene is a blend of documented practices and gentle imagination. Still, The mood is steady. There is a feeling that paperwork is being gathered, not for daily use, but for safekeeping. You drift to a wall where a few tablets hang in a niche. Maybe notices, maybe school pieces, maybe records awaiting delivery. You see a short text written in a careful hand, and although you cannot read it here in the dreamlike corridor of narration, you sense what writing often does in a human community. It creates a line between those who can access information and those who must trust someone else to tell them. That trust can be used well, or used badly, or used simply because people need coordination. Historians still argue whether some king lists aim primarily to preserve historical truth, or whether they function more as ideological documents that smooth over rival claims and messy realities. You let that debate settle like dust. The city does not need the debate to keep breathing. The river does not care who reigns, but humans care, because humans need order in their stories, especially when the world feels unpredictable. The administrator speaks again, and the scribe nods and begins a new line. You notice the order of the names. You notice that certain places are emphasized. And you feel the strange possibility that the list is not only a history, but also a map of authority. If one city claims a line of kings from a prestigious past, it strengthens its present. That is a mainstream interpretation many scholars consider. But your mind also drifts toward a softer, more mysterious angle, clearly labeled as theory. A fringe idea proposes that some lists and long numbers might conceal patterns, like mnemonic devices that store something other than what they appear to store. This theory isn't widely accepted, but if we treat it as a possibility, rather than a conclusion, it becomes an interesting bedtime puzzle. You can imagine a community that wants to coordinate quietly, perhaps because loud coordination attracts the trouble. In that imagined scenario, a long sequence of rain lengths could become a coded schedule. Not in the spy movie sense, but in the practical sense of, if you know the pattern, you know when the granaries should be ready, when the boats should be inspected, when families should be alerted. It is suggestive, not conclusive, and it sits in the misty zone on purpose. Outside the scribal room, you step into a narrow courtyard. The air is cooler here. A cat glides along a wall, like a shadow that learned to purr. You hear distant water again, and a soft thump from somewhere that might be someone tying a bundle. You notice small signs of organization that are easy to miss. The courtyard has fewer loose tools. The doorway has a hanging cloth packed neatly to one side. A storage jar has its lid set on top, rather than leaning nearby, as if someone wants everything ready to move. Most historians agree that ancient people respond to threats with the tools they have, and those tools include social structures, religious frameworks, and practical technology. One interpretation is that a society with strong administration can pivot faster in a crisis, because it already has routines for labor, storage, and distribution. A more cautious explanation could be that what looks like preparation is simply normal housekeeping and seasonal work. Both can be true, depending on the moment. You pass a small shrine, a niche with offerings, a bit of bread, a small cup, maybe a tuft of wool. Religion is not separate here. It is woven into daily action. Most historians agree that Mesopotamians attribute meaning to signs and divine will, and that temples serve as both spiritual and economic centers. If a river behaves strangely, people might interpret it as the god speaking. That interpretation can motivate action, sometimes sensible action, sometimes symbolic action, often both at once. It's possible that what prompts quiet movement in the night is framed as ritual obedience rather than panic. Another light joke drifts in, because your mind wants to keep the tone soft. You imagine a priest trying to deliver an ominous message with maximum calm, like, "Please remain serene," but also perhaps consider relocating your entire household. "Thank you, blessings." And everyone nods solemnly while quietly thinking, "That is a very specific blessing, sir." The joke fades, and the night remains steady. You wander toward a small administrative corner where seals are kept. A basket holds seal stones, each carved with tiny scenes, animals, deities, geometric patterns. The evidence we do have points to cylinder seals and stamp seals used for marking goods and confirming identity. You pick one up in your imagination and roll it across a lump of clay, and a miniature world appears. A line of figures, a standing god, a kneeling human, a star or crescent above them. It is beautiful. And it is also authority pressed into softness. You think about what it means to leave a place. You can abandon furniture. You can abandon some pots. But you do not abandon identity easily. A seal is portable. A tablet is portable. A list of names is portable. And you feel the subtle logic of a community that might choose to carry its administration with it. The way a modern person grabs a passport and phone charger before a storm. Outside, you see two men carrying a wrapped reed mat between them. The mat is heavy, with something inside. They are careful, quiet, focused. It could be anything. Tools, textiles, tablets, offerings. The scene stays ambiguous on purpose. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. But your imagination puts a soft label on it. Preparedness. You step toward a low wall where someone has scratched practice signs into dried clay. It is a child's work, uneven lines, repeated symbols. You feel the tenderness of that. Even in a world of kings and temples, a child is learning to make marks that last. A careful reading might suggest that the spread of writing skills is limited, but the cultural weight of writing is enormous. It shapes how people plan, how they remember, how they justify what they do. You breathe in slowly. The air tastes like dust and smoke and river damp carried on the breeze. A faint rustle comes from above, where someone adjusts a reed mat on a rooftop. A dog sighs, somewheres. A jar lid clinks softly into place, the sound of a decision completed. Your mind returns to the long numbers on the king lists, those stretches of time that feel too big, too smooth, too mythic. Mainstream scholarship often reads them as symbolic, part of a worldview where the boundary between human time and cosmic time is porous. That is a stable interpretation grounded in how ancient texts work across cultures. But your bedtime channel mind also invites the gentle what if. What if the numbers, while symbolic, also train people to think in cycles, to expect disruption, to accept that the world resets? And what if, in the hush of night, a community uses that cycle thinking to do the most practical thing possible? They prepare to move without shouting about it. You feel the city's administration humming like a hidden machine, not loud, not metallic, but organic, made of clay, rope, and shared habits. The scribe presses one more sign, the administrator ties one more knot, the apprentice repeats one more line. Each action is small. Together, they become a pattern. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is that scribes write, lists exist, seals authorize, and institutions manage resources. The interpreted part is that these systems can reflect social stress and strategic planning. The imagined part is a coded clock hidden in symbolic time, a whisper of coordination embedded in neat lines of clay. You let the idea remain a puzzle, not a verdict. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. And as you drift onward through warm dust and quiet lamps, you can almost hear the city counting. Not sheep, not grain, but moments. You wander into the part of the city where the air grows thicker with food smells, toasted grain, warm beer, onions, and that faint sharpness of goat. The night is still calm, but here it feels practical, like the city's stomach is quietly working even while most faces are turned towards sleep. A low doorway breathes heat into the street, and you hear a gentle slosh, the sound of liquid being poured, maybe into a jar, maybe into a skin, maybe into a bowl that will be carried somewhere with care. Most historians agree that temples and their attached households help organize labor and distribution in many Sumerian city-states. And archaeology suggests that storehouses and ration systems play a major role in feeding workers. The evidence we do have points to a world where grain is not just a crop, but a schedule, because planting, harvesting, measuring, and issuing rations becomes the pulse that keeps the city steady. You step closer to a courtyard where stacked baskets form a low wall, and you notice how each basket has been sealed with clay, marked with a simple impression. A man stands over a low table, counting with his fingers, murmuring numbers as if they are prayers. Beside him sits a basket of small clay tokens, the kind that earlier systems use for accounting before or alongside written records. Scholars continue to debate exactly how different accounting systems overlap and transition. But most historians agree that the need to track goods drives innovation in record keeping. Tonight, it feels less like innovation and more like quiet discipline. Count, seal, stack, repeat. You notice that the granary area is busy in a way that does not look like daily bustle. Nobody is laughing loudly. Nobody is bargaining. The voices are low, almost respectful, as if sound itself could spill something valuable. One interpretation is that this is simply how institutions behave at night, focused and efficient. Another interpretation is that people work this way when they believe there is limited time, not enough time for extra words. You step into the edge of a storehouse, and you smell the inside dry grain dust, old straw, cool clay. It is a smell that makes you think of bread that has not been baked yet, of full bellies that are still only a plan. Large jars line the wall. Some jars are sealed. Some are open while workers scoop grain into smaller containers. Archaeology suggests that storage technologies include jars, bins, baskets, and sealed rooms. And the evidence we do have points to careful protection against moisture, rodents, and spoilage. In a land shaped by water, keeping grain dry is a kind of daily victory. A woman kneels by a jar, tying a cloth over its mouth, then pressing a clay seal into place. The seal's pattern is crisp, like a signature. Most historians agree that sealing practices help prevent tampering and signal ownership or authorization. This is the documented anchor, the firm thing. But you feel an interpretation angle tugging gently at your sleeve. It's possible that when a community expects disruption, the act of sealing becomes more frequent, more urgent, more widespread. Not because people suddenly become more honest, but because uncertainty makes trust feel precious. You watch a group of workers carry out small sacks, each sack the size of a sleeping child. They move them to a shaded area where other bundles already wait. The bundles are arranged in neat rows, like soldiers, except nobody wants to call them that, because this is not about war tonight. It is about logistics and survival. A more cautious explanation could be that the city is preparing for a festival, a large work project, or seasonal redistribution. That is entirely plausible. Yet the mood remains strange, and your imagination offers a soft cinematic what if. What if these bundles are staged for quick movement, not long-term storage? A light joke rises. Because your mind is a gentle troublemaker, you imagine the temple administrator saying, "Please pack your essentials," and somebody asks, "Is beer essential?" And the administrator pauses, like this is the hardest moral question of his entire career. In your mind, he sighs and says, "Yes, but seal it properly." You let the joke fade into the grain dust. In another corner, you see stacks of flatbread cooling on woven trays. The bread smells nutty and comforting. A teenage worker turns each piece, checking for dryness. Most historians agree that bread and beer are staples in Mesopotamia, and that rations can include grain, bread, and beer depending on context. The evidence we do have points to a diet shaped by cereals, with additions like fish, dates, and vegetables. Tonight, the bread is not being eaten right away. It is being cooled, dried, and wrapped. That detail feels small, but it catches in your mind like a hook. You drift toward a narrow side room where jars of oil are stored. Oil glows faintly in the lamplight, thick and golden. Oil is valuable for cooking, for lamps, for skin, for ritual. The jars are sealed carefully, and the floor is clean, almost obsessively clean, as if a single spill would feel like a disaster. It's possible this cleanliness is standard for valuable goods. It's also possible it reflects a heightened sense of caution. You step outside again and listen. The night is filled with soft sounds of industry, rope tightening, baskets shifting, clay seals being pressed, a donkey's hooves on packed earth. But there is another layer too, the absence of casual noise. No music drifting from a feast, no loud storytelling, no public argument. It is as if the city's social life has been quietly turned down, like someone lowering a volume knob. Most historians agree that temples are not only religious centers, but economic hubs, and that they can mobilize people for large tasks. One interpretation is that this mobilization can be used for emergency response, as well as routine projects. The idea of controlled scarcity comes into focus here. When resources are managed centrally, leaders can choose to ration, to redistribute, to store, to move. That can protect people, or it can enforce power, or it can do both at once. The mystery is not in the existence of management, but in what motives and pressures lie behind it. Historians still argue whether ration systems primarily reflect fairness and social support, or whether they represent a tool of control that can be tightened when elites feel threatened. You let that debate sit without needing to solve it. You watch an elder with a calm face hand out small portions of dried fish to workers. Not much, just enough to keep them steady. A child sits nearby, chewing quietly, eyes half closed. The child's calm makes the scene feel even stranger, because children usually announce everything. Here, the child seems trained to be quiet, or perhaps too sleepy to care. You move toward the temple courtyard itself. The space is wide, open to the sky, with a cool breeze moving through. A few columns cast long shadows. At the courtyard's edge, you see a line of people waiting, each holding a small clay bowl. A worker at a table ladles out grain or flour, measured, consistent. The people do not push. They do not beg loudly. They wait with the patience of those who know the rules. Archaeology suggests that measurement systems and standardized containers exist, and the evidence we do have points to a culture that values precise accounting. Tonight, the precision feels like a form of comfort. When the world outside is unpredictable, the act of measuring a ration becomes a tiny claim that order still exists. One interpretation is that this is the psychological role of bureaucracy, not just an economic one. You notice that some bowls are marked differently, perhaps indicating different worker categories, different households, different statuses. Most historians agree that social hierarchy exists and that rations can vary accordingly. A more cautious explanation could be that what you are seeing is routine distribution tied to labor schedules, but your imagination, gentle and labeled as imagined, wonders if extra rations are being quietly issued to those expected to move, like provisions that will not be eaten within the city walls. In a shadowed corner, two men whisper while tying reed ropes around bundles. You cannot hear their words clearly, but you see their hands move quickly, practiced. Rope is not glamorous, but it is civilization. Rope binds bundles, ties boats, lifts baskets, secures doors. Archaeology suggests reed and fiber technologies are widespread, and the evidence we do have points to skilled craft in making cordage. Tonight, rope looks like a language. Tight knot means ready. Double knot means do not open until needed. Loose knot means you will return. You do not know which is which, but you feel the possibility that they do. A popular rumor claims that ancient temple communities could organize people with secret signals, hidden gestures, coded phrases. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it sits comfortably in a bedtime story as long as we keep it in the realm of possibility. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, you can imagine a temple courtyard where a certain way of placing a jar lid means one thing, and a different way means another. To be clear, this is debated and speculative. Still, the mood remains. You move toward a small room where textiles are stacked. Cloth is folded with care, and you smell lanolin and dye. A woman runs her hand across a piece of fabric, then folds it again, tighter. Clothing is portable warmth and identity, a way to carry your household into a new place. The evidence we do have points to textile production as a major economic activity, including weaving and wool processing. Most historians agree that textiles can be used as trade goods and as payment. Tonight, textiles feel like luggage. You pause by a pile of reed mats, and you hear one of them creak as it is rolled tighter. Reed mats can be roofs, beds, walls, boats, doors. They are versatile, light, and easy to carry. A careful reading might suggest that a society built on reed technologies is naturally more mobile than we imagine, able to pack up parts of daily life without needing wagons or heavy wooden structures. If imagination steps in, you can see a quiet plan forming, not a dramatic exodus, but a gradual redistribution of people and goods toward safer ground. A second small joke drifts in. You imagine someone arguing over what counts as essential. Like, do we take the fancy serving bowl? And another person says, the river does not care about your fancy bowl. And then they take it anyway. Humans are very consistent across time. We pack the sentimental thing even when we swear we won't. You watch a priest step into the courtyard, not with a loud proclamation, but with a simple gesture. He lifts his hand, and the workers pause. He speaks a few words that sound like a blessing, but also like instructions. Most historians agree that ritual language and daily administration can overlap, because spiritual authority supports social coordination. One interpretation is that blessings can be used to frame practical actions as sacred duty. That can help a community act together without fear, because obedience feels like safety. You breathe in the cool air. You feel the calm weight of grain dust settling on your skin like invisible flour. You hear the faint clink of a clay seal impression being pressed for the 100th time. The rhythm is steady, almost soothing, like counting breaths. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is that temples store and distribute goods. Rations exist, seals mark ownership, and textiles and reeds are central to daily life. The interpreted part is that shifts in storage and distribution might reflect stress or preparation. The imagined part is the idea that controlled scarcity becomes quiet provisioning, and that the city is arranging its survival with the same calm precision it uses to count grain. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. And as you drift along the edge of the granaries, listening to rope tighten and bread cool, you feel the city making itself lighter, bundle by bundle, seal by seal, in the softest possible way. You drift away from the warmth of storehouses and into open air, where the night feels cooler and sharper, like someone rinsed the sky clean. The ground under your feet changes from packed courtyard earth to a firmer path edged with reeds. Here, the city's sound thins out, and water takes over as the main voice. Not loud, just constant. A canal runs beside you, dark as ink, and the surface carries faint ripples that look like slow breathing. Most historians agree that Sumerian communities engineer canals, dikes, and irrigation networks to manage river water for agriculture. Archaeology suggests long-term investment in canal systems, with maintenance requiring coordinated labor and local authority. The evidence we do have points to water management as both technology and politics, because whoever directs the canals can influence fields, food, and livelihoods. You follow the canal toward a section where workers are gathered with tools that look simple but purposeful. Wooden shovels, reed baskets, poles, and digging sticks. A lamp hangs from a peg, shielded to keep the light low. Nobody is shouting. There is a steady scrape as earth is moved, and every so often a clump of wet clay lands in a basket with a soft thud. The rhythm is hypnotic, like the slow sound of someone smoothing sheets on a bed. A foreman stands near the bank, watching the water, watching the workers, watching the angle of the canal wall. His face is calm in the lamp glow, but his eyes move constantly. One interpretation is that this is routine maintenance, the kind that has to happen often in a canal world where silt builds up and banks erode. Another interpretation is that the timing feels urgent. It's possible that canal repairs done at night suggest a problem that cannot wait for morning. You kneel near the edge and look down. The water is not raging, but it looks heavier than it should, carrying more sediment, moving with a slow insistence. You cannot measure it with instruments. You can only feel it with the old human sense that notices when something familiar becomes slightly off. A careful reading might suggest that ancient communities would recognize these subtle shifts too, because they live with the river the way you live with the sound of your own neighborhood. You know what normal sounds like. You know when normal changes. The workers reinforce a weak section of bank with baskets of clay and reeds, layering material like they are building a wall out of patience. Archaeology suggests that reed bundles and packed earth can stabilize canal edges, and the evidence we do have points to constant adaptation. You watch hands press wet clay into gaps, smoothing it like pottery. It is intimate work, almost gentle, even though it is done against a force that could wipe the whole structure away. Historians still argue whether major ancient flood events were usually sudden and catastrophic in a single moment, or whether many disasters unfolded as prolonged sequences of rising water, repeated breaches, and cumulative damage. That debate matters here because you can imagine both: a sudden surge that snaps a bank, or a long, exhausting season of small failures that eventually becomes too much. One interpretation is that the slow kind is the one that teaches people to act quietly, because you do not evacuate in a single shout. You adjust, you patch, you watch, you move a little, you move more. You continue along the canal and notice markers, small posts, stones, or cut notches that help workers judge water levels and flow. Measurement does not always require metal instruments. Sometimes it is just a line on a post that your grandfather taught you to watch. The evidence we do have points to practical knowledge passed through generations. Most historians agree that canal management is a learned skill supported by tradition and authority. In a wider section of the canal, a group of men drag a flat sled loaded with reeds and clay. The sled scrapes along the ground with a sound like a slow whisper. You feel the weight of their labor in the way their shoulders hunch and then relax in rhythm. Nobody talks much. The only voices are short instructions: left, lift, steady, and then silence again. It feels like a team that has agreed to save breath. A light joke drifts in because your mind likes to soften the seriousness. You imagine one worker saying, "We should have invented wheels for this," and another worker says, "Yes, and we also should have invented a way to stop the river from having opinions." They both snort quietly and get back to work. Humor is another kind of tool, and ancient people definitely had it. You reach a junction where the canal splits, one branch leading toward fields and gardens, another toward a drainage channel. The junction is where control becomes visible. A simple wooden gate can redirect water. A block of packed clay can decide which field lives and which field dries. Most historians agree that disputes over water are common in canal societies, because water is prosperity. Archaeology suggests the presence of canals, levees, and engineered channels, and sometimes texts describe conflicts and agreements about water rights. Tonight, the junction feels like a decision point. A foreman tests the gate, lifting and lowering it slightly, watching how the water responds. One interpretation is that he is calibrating for irrigation needs. Another interpretation, softer and speculative, is that he is preparing for a surge, if we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion. You can imagine gates being adjusted to protect the city by letting water escape into sacrificial channels, or to keep water from backing up into living areas. You walk farther out, beyond the densest housing, where fields stretch in darkness. You can smell damp soil and crushed reeds. The fields are quiet, but not empty. You see silhouettes of workers checking dikes, walking along narrow raised paths, their feet careful not to slip. They carry torches or lamps shaded, so the light does not travel far. That detail feels deliberate. It's possible they simply do not want to waste fuel or attract insects. It is also possible they are trying not to draw attention. The night sky is full of stars, and the fields lie beneath them like a dark quilt. You hear frogs, a steady chorus, and their presence suggests water is near, more water than you might want. Archaeology suggests wetlands and marshy areas exist around parts of southern Mesopotamia. And the evidence we do have points to landscapes that shift with seasons and river behavior. In such a landscape, safety can be a matter of choosing slightly higher ground and keeping your dikes intact. You reach a low embankment where the river's presence feels closer, even if you cannot see the main channel. The air is wetter. You hear a deeper hush, the sound of larger water moving. A man crouches, pressing his hand into the soil of the embankment. He pulls it back and rubs the mud between his fingers, testing texture, moisture, stickiness. This is the kind of knowledge that does not require writing. It lives in hands. One interpretation is that he is checking whether the embankment will hold. A more cautious explanation could be that he is checking the soil for planting conditions. Both are plausible. But the way he looks toward the darkness feels like he is listening for something. Not a monster, not a dramatic omen, just the steady patience of water looking for a weakness. A popular rumor claims that ancient canal builders could predict floods with uncanny accuracy, reading subtle signs in animal behavior, wind shifts, and sediment changes. This theory isn't widely accepted as supernatural, but it is reasonable that experienced communities would notice patterns and respond. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, you can imagine knowledge that feels like prophecy simply because it is practiced observation. You move to a small repair station where reed bundles are stacked like firewood. The bundles smell fresh, green, and faintly sweet. Nearby are baskets of clay, already mixed, ready to be applied. Prepared material is a sign of readiness. Most historians agree that canal upkeep is constant, and having materials on hand is sensible. Still, the quantity here feels significant. There are more bundles than a casual patch job would require. You watch workers apply clay in layers, then press reeds against it, then more clay, building a composite barrier. The barrier looks like a sandwich made by someone who takes sandwiches very seriously. Another gentle joke slips in. You imagine a future archaeologist saying, "Yes, clearly the ancient engineers understood layered construction, and also, clearly they were hungry. The workers would not laugh out loud, but you feel they might smile in their own way." A sudden sound interrupts the rhythm, a crack, not loud like thunder, but sharp enough to make heads turn. A small section of bank slumps, and water begins to seep through, thin at first, then thicker. The workers move immediately, not frantic, but fast. They shove clay into the gap, press reed bundles, stamp it down. The foreman points, and 2 men run to bring more material. This is a new development, a small failure that could become larger. It is also a reminder that water doesn't need drama to be dangerous. It only needs persistence. Most historians agree that flood management involves both prevention and response. And archaeology suggests that ancient communities invest heavily in infrastructure because the alternative is loss. One interpretation is that repeated small breaches teach people to plan for retreat, because even with the best effort, some floods will win. A more cautious explanation could be that most breaches are contained and do not lead to evacuation. Both are true in different years. But tonight, in this imagined corridor of calm history, you feel the community's skill, and you also feel the limits of skill. The workers seal the breach, and the seep slows, then stops. They stand back, breathing quietly. No cheering, no celebration, just a shared understanding that the river tried something and the people answered. You walk along the embankment and notice something else. Small piles of debris have been cleared from the path, as if someone wanted the route to stay open. The cleared path could be for workers and tools. It could also be for people moving quickly in the dark, if needed. Again, possibility, not certainty. Historians still argue whether certain ancient settlement shifts in southern Mesopotamia reflect primarily environmental pressure, political change, or a mix of many factors that cannot be separated cleanly. That debate hovers like a distant star. Because even if the river threatens, human decisions also matter. Who gets warned first? Who is allowed to move? Which gates are opened? Which fields are sacrificed? Which records are carried? You reach a small watch point, a raised patch of ground with a simple shelter of reeds. Inside sits an older watcher with a jar of water and a wrapped cloth. He looks up as you approach and then returns his gaze to the canal surface. His job is not heroic. His job is attention. He listens for unusual flows, watches for floating debris, checks the level against a mark on a post. He is calm, in the way someone is calm when they have accepted responsibility. You sit with him in your imagination, letting the quiet settle. The water reflects stars. The reeds whisper. The night breeze cools your face. You sense that an engineered world can never fully control what it depends on, and that the smartest response is not always to fight harder, but sometimes to move. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is that Sumerian canals exist, require constant maintenance, and shape society. The interpreted part is that unusual repairs and readiness materials might hint at urgent concern. The imagined part is a night of quiet engineering that feels like a rehearsal for leaving, with paths cleared and gates tested under starlight. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. And as you keep walking beside the dark canal, you can almost hear the water thinking, patient and unstoppable, while the city answers in clay and reeds, calm and quick. You step into a part of the night where stories feel closer than buildings. The air is cooler, and the city's edges blur into open space where reeds sway, and the ground alternates between firm earth and soft marsh. A small fire burns in a sheltered hollow, the flames kept low, and around it sit a few people whose work is not digging or sealing or carrying, but remembering. Their voices are quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you lean in without realizing it, because something in you recognizes the old human habit of gathering near warmth and trading meaning. Most historians agree that flood traditions appear across Mesopotamia in multiple forms, and that later texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis story preserve versions of a flood narrative. Archaeology suggests that severe floods are plausible in river systems like the Tigris and Euphrates, and the evidence we do have points to real flood deposits at some sites, though not always in the same period or scale. That is the documented anchor. Still, one interpretation is that a powerful story can blend multiple events into one archetype, because memory does not file disasters neatly by date. It files them by feeling. One of the storytellers, an older woman with a steady gaze, speaks slowly, as if she is laying each word down like a stone. She talks about water that rises beyond expectation, about wind that changes, about a day when the river forgets its boundaries. No names yet, no heroes, just the shape of danger. You notice how her listeners do not react with surprise. They react with recognition. The story is not entertainment in the modern sense. It is instruction, wearing the clothing of myth. A careful reading might suggest that oral tradition can serve as a safety system, because a society without meteorology still has pattern memory. If a community repeats a flood story, it keeps alive the idea that floods can be bigger than ordinary seasons. This is possible, not certain, but it fits how humans behave. You tell stories about what hurt you, so you do not forget. You tell stories about what saved you, so you can do it again. The storyteller draws a line in the dirt with a stick, showing a riverbank. She draws small marks for houses. Then she moves her hand upward and covers the marks with her palm, as if water is rising over them. She does it gently, not to frighten, but to make the image clear. This is the moment where mainstream history and mystery begin to overlap. Most historians agree that stories evolve, but they also agree stories can preserve kernels of experience. The mystery is which kernels remain and which are reshaped. Historians still argue whether the great Mesopotamian flood tales reflect one singular catastrophic flood remembered for centuries, or whether they represent a composite memory of many destructive floods stitched into one enduring narrative. You sit near the fire and feel the warmth on your hands. You listen to the details that sound practical, not magical. The storyteller mentions gathering food quickly. She mentions carrying water skins. She mentions keeping children close. She talks about moving to higher ground, and her voice does not glamorize it. It sounds tiring. It sounds like a long walk with heavy bundles. That kind of detail is where an interpretation can take root. One interpretation is that practical instructions embedded in myth might echo real behavior during floods, like evacuation and provisioning. Then a younger man speaks, and his tone shifts slightly into reverence. He mentions a figure who was warned, someone who listens, someone who acts. He does not give a full heroic speech. He says it, like a proverb, as if everyone knows the story's spine even if the flesh changes. And here, the cinematic what if rises gently. What if the story is not centered on a single person at all, but on a community that needs a symbol to organize around? A hero can become a handle for a heavy memory. You notice that the group around the fire includes people who look like the workers and people who look like administrators, and one person whose clothing suggests priestly status. That mixture feels meaningful. Flood stories are for everyone. Water does not respect job titles. Most historians agree that religion and governance intertwine in Mesopotamia, and that temples are central to community life. One interpretation is that flood narratives could serve to reinforce religious authority by framing survival as obedience to divine instruction. Another interpretation is simpler. Religion provides language for randomness, making chaos feel less pointless. The priest speaks next, and he talks about justice, not in a loud moral lecture, but in the calm way someone might discuss weather. He suggests that when humans become too noisy, too greedy, too careless, the world answers. You recognize this as a common theme in many flood myths worldwide. It is not unique to Sumer, but in this landscape it feels especially close, because the river can indeed answer human carelessness. A popular rumor claims that ancient flood stories hide encrypted histories of forgotten civilizations and advanced knowledge. This theory isn't widely accepted, and it often goes far beyond what the texts can support. If we treat it as a possibility, rather than a conclusion, we can still enjoy the question, not as a claim of secret truth, but as a reminder that myths can carry layered meanings. Some layers are moral lessons, some layers are political messages, some layers are echoes of real storms and rising water. The storyteller shifts again and adds a detail that makes your attention sharpen. She describes silence, not the silence of death or fear, but the silence of people moving without argument. She says that on the night before the water came, the streets sounded different, like a city holding its breath. You do not treat this as confirmed historical reporting. You treat it as a motif. But motifs matter. They are the shape stories keep, because they feel true. One interpretation is that a motif of silence could reflect an actual strategy, because loud panic spreads chaos, quiet movement keeps order, or it could be purely poetic, a way to heighten tension in a tale. A more cautious explanation could be that silence is a natural memory of nighttime activity. Still, your mind lingers on it, because the idea of a silent evacuation fits the emotional logic of a community that has learned to move efficiently. The fire crackles softly. Someone tosses in a small piece of dried reed, and it flares briefly, then settles. The smell is sweet and grassy. A child near the edge of the group yawns and leans against an adult. The adult wraps an arm around the child without interrupting their listening. This is how stories become inheritance. The priest traces a symbol in the air, perhaps a sign of a god, perhaps a gesture of blessing. He says that the gods speak through signs, through dreams, through omens. Most historians agree that Mesopotamians interpret dreams and omens seriously, and that divination practices are important across many periods. One interpretation is that omen language could provide a socially acceptable way to talk about fear. You can say, "the god warns," instead of saying, "I am scared." The message becomes communal, not personal. A gentle joke slips in, because even in sacred conversations, humans find room for small humor. You imagine someone whispering, "I had an omen too. It said I should go to bed earlier," and everyone gives the kind of polite smile that says, "Yes, very wise. Please be quiet now." The joke fades into the firelight. A new voice joins the circle. A traveller by the look of his worn sandals and dust-stained hem. He speaks of other cities, other waterways, other places where floods behave differently. He mentions that some lands flood with a slow creep, and others with a sudden rush. His words widen the story from local memory to regional awareness. Most historians agree that Mesopotamian cultures exchange goods and ideas along trade routes, and the evidence we do have points to interaction between cities over long distances. Stories travel too. A flood story from one place can become a flood story everywhere, reshaped to fit local rivers. The traveller tells of a marsh where people build on reed platforms, and how those people can move quickly when water rises. Archaeology suggests that marsh environments support unique building and boat technologies. One interpretation is that marsh dwellers might influence broader cultural ideas about mobility and survival. In a cinematic what if, you can picture a city learning from marsh people, learning to treat water not only as threat, but as highway. The circle grows quiet as the storyteller finishes with a line that lands gently, like a blanket. She says that the flood is not only water, it is forgetting. When water covers streets, it erases tracks, it washes away small possessions. It makes yesterday feel unreal. But she also says that memory can float, stories float, names float. If you keep repeating the story, you keep a piece of the drowned world alive. This is where you feel the purpose of myth. Not to deceive, but to preserve. Most historians agree that flood myths are among the most enduring human narratives, and in Mesopotamia they become central to literature and identity. One interpretation is that such myths help societies cope with vulnerability, turning disaster into meaning. Another interpretation is that they also serve political functions, justifying new dynasties or temple authority by framing chaos as part of divine order. You look around the circle and notice something practical again. Beside the fire are bundles, not many, but a few, and they look packed, tied, ready. Someone has a small jar sealed with clay. Someone has a reed basket with dried food. It could be coincidence. It could be routine, but it creates a new development in your mind, a merging of story and action. People are not just hearing about floods, they are behaving as if floods remain possible. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. We cannot claim that a specific group is preparing because of a specific story, but it is reasonable that repeated flood narratives keep preparedness alive. The traveller stands and points toward the dark horizon. He does not predict doom. He simply says the wind feels different. The group listens. The priest nods. The storyteller does not argue. They do not need certainty to act with care. That is a mature kind of wisdom, the kind that says, we may not know, but we can prepare. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is that Mesopotamian flood stories exist, and that floods are real in river landscapes. The interpreted part is that oral tradition might preserve practical memory and encourage preparedness. The imagined part is a quiet circle by a low fire where the motif of silence becomes a hint of how people could move, not in panic, but in practiced calm. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. And as the fire sinks into embers and the voices soften, you feel the flood story doing what stories do best, turning fear into a plan, and turning a plan into something people can carry without shouting. You drift into a quieter street, where the houses are slightly larger and the doorways are guarded by small figures moulded in clay, protective spirits pressed into shape and placed like gentle warnings. The air smells like cooling ash and faint incense, and the night feels less like work and more like decision. A lamp burns inside a doorway, and you hear a low chant, not loud enough to carry far, but steady, like someone speaking to the dark itself. Most historians agree that multiple Mesopotamian texts feature a flood survivor figure, including names like Ziusudra in Sumerian tradition and Atrahasis in Akkadian tradition, and later the Utnapishtim figure in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The evidence we do have points to overlapping narrative cores that appear in different languages and periods. That is documented in the sense that the texts exist and share motifs. But historians debate how these versions relate, which traditions are older, and how much each one reshapes the story to fit its time. You move toward a small interior courtyard where a few people sit around a table with a clay tablet laid flat in the center. Their posture is careful, like they are handling something that matters. A man reads aloud slowly, tracing the signs with his finger. The others listen with a seriousness that feels different from the storytelling circle you might imagine in a more casual setting. This feels like instruction. It feels like someone trying to get details right. A careful reading might suggest that when a flood narrative appears in a written text, it can function differently than when it is purely oral. Written words can standardize a message. They can preserve exact phrasing. They can travel between institutions. Most historians agree that scribes and literate elites can shape how stories are recorded and transmitted. One interpretation is that the flood survivor figure becomes a bridge between divine warning and human action, showing the ideal response. Listen, prepare, build, store. But tonight, you keep your footing careful. This is interpretation, not certainty, because we cannot say any single audience used the story in a single way. Still, the mood in this courtyard suggests people take the idea of instructions seriously. The reader's voice slows when he reaches a part about a warning. In some versions, the warning comes through a god or through a dream. In some versions, it is framed as a command or a secret. Most historians agree that divine communication is a core feature of Mesopotamian literature and religion, and that dreams and omens are treated as meaningful. One interpretation is that these narrative devices provide a socially acceptable explanation for why someone would take unusual action. If you build a boat or move your household, you can say, "I was told," rather than saying, "I guessed." Historians still argue whether the flood survivor character is best understood as a memory of a real person or group, or as a literary device that condenses communal experience into a single face. You let that debate sit like a clay tablet on a table, solid but not solved. You watch the listeners in the courtyard. One person nods at certain lines as if they recognize the practicality. Another person frowns, not in disbelief, but in concentration, like they are turning the instructions into a checklist in their mind. That checklist idea is where your mystery angle enters gently. One interpretation is that the flood survivor story could serve as a template for preparedness, a set of steps to follow if water becomes dangerous. A more cautious explanation could be that the instructions are literary flourishes meant to make the story vivid, not a literal emergency manual. Both can coexist. Literature can entertain and instruct at the same time. The reader reaches a passage about gathering supplies, food, water, seeds, tools. In some traditions, animals are included. In others, the focus is on family and skilled workers. The evidence we do have points to variation, and variation suggests local priorities and cultural shifts. Tonight, your imagination takes that variation and turns it into a possibility. What if the hero is not one person, but a category? The builder, the organizer, the household head, the administrator, the skilled craftsperson. In that cinematic what-if, the flood survivor is a role that many people can step into. You notice something new in the courtyard? Against the wall sits a bundle of reeds and wooden ribs, the beginnings of a frame, not necessarily a full boat. Maybe a storage platform, maybe a repaired hull piece. Someone has smeared bitumen on a strip of material and set it aside to cure. Archaeology suggests bitumen is used for waterproofing and construction. The evidence we do have points to boat building and rivercraft being common. The new development here is the closeness of story and craft. The story is being read. The materials are being prepared. That pairing feels suggestive. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. We cannot claim this craftwork is inspired by the story. It could be routine, but it creates a calm question. In a culture where stories are not separate from life, could a repeated narrative shape how people think about readiness? It's possible. A light joke sneaks in, because you are still you, even in ancient courtyards. You imagine someone reading a divine instruction and another listener whispering, "Do the gods have any advice on where to find more reeds at midnight? Because I would love that." The reader gives a look that says, "Please respect the divine." Everyone stays solemn, but you can feel the human itch to laugh. The reader continues, and the wording shifts into something that sounds like a warning not to tell everyone. This is a common narrative tension in flood stories, the idea of secret knowledge. Some versions imply that the warning is meant to be hidden from other gods or from the public. Most historians agree that secrecy as a motif appears in many myths, often to heighten drama or explain why not everyone is saved. One interpretation is that secrecy reflects social reality. Elites often have early access to information, and public announcements can create chaos. A more cautious explanation could be that secrecy is simply storytelling technique. A fringe idea proposes that the secrecy motif points to real coordinated evacuations managed by institutions, where instructions are given quietly to avoid panic. This theory isn't widely accepted, and the evidence is not strong enough to treat it as fact. But as a bedtime possibility, it invites a gentle mental image. A leader does not ring a bell. A priest does not shout. Instead, households receive a whispered message, prepare bundles, and move in small groups. You watch the listeners. Their faces are thoughtful, not terrified. The mood is calm, like people discussing weather patterns they cannot control but can anticipate. One person asks a question in a low voice, and the reader answers with a phrase that sounds like an explanation of timing, a season, a sign, a threshold. Timing matters in flood stories. Build before the water rises. Gather before the storm breaks. Move before the path becomes mud. Most historians agree that Mesopotamian societies develop calendars, seasonal rhythms, and agricultural cycles, and that timing labor is essential. One interpretation is that flood stories mirror agricultural logic. Preparation leads to survival. If imagination steps in, you can picture a community using the story as a seasonal reminder, like a lullaby that also says, "Keep your boat patched." You step out of the courtyard and wander down a lane where artisans live. A potter's wheel sits silent. A loom stands with threads hanging like pale spider silk. A carpenter's tools are arranged neatly. The quiet here is different from ordinary sleep quiet. It feels curated. As you pass a doorway, you see a family sorting small objects into a basket. A seal stone, a bit of jewelry, a small tablet wrapped in cloth, a knife for cutting reeds, a spindle. These are not luxuries. They are portable life. Most historians agree that households own personal goods and tools, and archaeology suggests that everyday objects can be surprisingly durable in the record, unless they are carried away. One interpretation is that when you find gaps in the archaeological record, missing goods, missing portable items, it may reflect removal rather than destruction. This is not always true, and it varies by site and context, but it is a useful possibility. The family's movements are efficient. The older child holds the basket. The younger child clutches a reed doll. The adult checks the knot twice. You feel the softness of that. Survival is often boring in the moment. It is checking knots. It is counting jars. It is wrapping bread. It is making sure the child has something to hold. You hear another quiet chant from a nearby house. A woman sings under her breath, not a performance, more like a steady sound to keep herself calm. The song is about water, about boats, about a God who watches. You do not claim the exact content. You simply feel the atmosphere. In Mesopotamian culture, most historians agree that hymns and prayers are common, and that music and ritual are part of daily life. One interpretation is that singing can be a tool for coordination, keeping tempo while people work, keeping nerves steady while decisions are made. Historians still argue whether the flood stories were mainly elite literature recited in formal settings, or whether their themes and motifs were widely shared in popular memory across households and generations. You keep walking and find a narrow dock where boats are tied. Here, the activity is minimal but purposeful. A man checks a boat's rope, then checks a second rope, then looks up at the sky. Another person presses bitumen into a seam and smooths it with a flat tool. The bitumen smells sharp and earthy. The new development here is the level of detail, the careful attention to small weaknesses. Boats do not need to be perfect for everyday travel. But if you are thinking about high water and debris, you patch more carefully. A more cautious explanation could be that boat maintenance is always like this, because a leak can kill you even on a normal day. True. Yet your mind keeps that quiet question alive. Why tonight? Why now? You see a small tablet case being loaded into a boat, wrapped and tied as if it is precious. Records are portable power. If you move, you may want to keep your claims, your debts owed, your rights, your identities. Most historians agree that administration depends on records, and that writing can travel with goods. One interpretation is that moving records suggests planned relocation rather than sudden disaster. Again, possibility, not certainty. You step back and let the water's reflection move on the boat hull. The stars shimmer. The canal water smells like wet reeds and silt. You feel the calm edge of the myth. A flood survivor story is being read as instruction. People are gathering supplies. Boats are being checked. Families are being organized. The hero, in this sleepy, cautious interpretation, looks less like a lone chosen person and more like a community following a pattern. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is that multiple flood survivor texts exist and contain warnings and preparation motifs. The interpreted part is that these motifs might reflect practical memory and could influence how people think about readiness. The imagined part is the idea that the chosen one is really a checklist for many, and that quiet coordination could be tucked inside sacred phrasing. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. And as you stand by the boats and hear the soft smear of bitumen and the gentle hush of chanting, you feel a calm possibility settle into the night. The safest plan is often the quietest one. You step into a riverside work zone where the smell of bitumen is stronger, thick and earthy, like the ground itself decided to become glue. The air here is damp, and every sound seems softened by water and reeds. A row of boats rests near the bank, some tied, some upside down for inspection, and a few balanced on simple wooden supports. Lamps burn low, shielded by clay shades, turning the scene into a quiet workshop under stars. Archaeology suggests that boats and water transport are common in Mesopotamia, including reed boats coated with bitumen and wooden craft where materials allow. Most historians agree that rivers and canals serve as major routes for trade, fishing, and travel. The evidence we do have points to practical boat-building knowledge and routine maintenance, because a river world punishes neglect quickly. You move closer and watch a boat builder kneel beside a hull seam. His hands are dark with bitumen, and he works with slow confidence, smoothing, pressing, and then smoothing again. The bitumen shines in the lamplight like dark honey. A younger helper holds a heated tool, not metal necessarily, maybe a warmed stone or a simple implement, used to soften and spread the sealant. The builder tests the seam with his thumb, then nods once, as if approving a decision that cannot be argued with. One interpretation is that this is normal maintenance. A more cautious explanation could be that a busy river community always smells like bitumen at night. Both are plausible, but you notice how many boats are being checked at once. Not one boat, not two, several. That scale becomes the new development. It suggests coordination, a shared timeline, a moment when many owners decide their vessels must be ready. A man carries a bundle of reeds to a boat that looks newly patched. He sets the bundle down, then reaches for rope. Rope is everywhere here, coiled like sleeping snakes, hanging from pegs, tied to posts. Archaeology suggests cordage and reed technologies are widespread. The evidence we do have points to skilled tying, binding, and weaving that makes boats possible and makes cargo secure. You crouch to watch how cargo is arranged. It is not random. Baskets are placed low for stability. Jars are cushioned with reeds. A woven mat is rolled tight and tied twice. Someone checks the balance of a load by rocking the boat slightly, feeling the weight shift. This is logistics, the unromantic heart of survival. Most historians agree that ancient transport depends on careful planning, especially when moving bulk goods like grain. One interpretation is that a community preparing for risk would arrange cargo like this: low, stable, waterproofed, because panic makes you careless and carelessness makes you sink. A light joke arrives because your mind is still awake enough to be playful. You imagine the boat builder as the world's first quality control manager, tapping the seam like, yes, this is acceptable, and then stamping an invisible approval mark that says, certified not to sink immediately. Someone nearby mutters something that sounds like agreement, and you feel the humor in humans, trusting good craftsmanship the way you trust a good pillow. The work continues with quiet urgency. A helper carries a jar of water and sprinkles it over a reed bundle, then presses the damp reeds into a gap. Another person adds a layer of bitumen, smoothing it with the flat of a hand. The smell is strong enough to cling to your imagination. It becomes a motif, not in a loud symbolic way, but in a sleepy sensory way. Bitumen means sealing. Sealing means keeping water out. Keeping water out means you have somewhere you plan to go where water might try to come in. Most historians agree that bitumen is used for waterproofing boats and sometimes structures. Archaeology suggests bitumen trade and use in Mesopotamia over long periods. The evidence we do have points to practical chemistry and resource management. Yet, in the misty zone, you can let a thought hover. What if the smell of bitumen in a city at night is not just the smell of work, but the smell of readiness? You walk toward a staging area where goods are gathered near the water. This is not a market. Nobody is bargaining. The goods are organized in clusters, like small households assembled into piles. One cluster has jars and baskets. Another has bundles of cloth. Another has tools, a hoe head, a digging stick, a small adze, a net for fishing. The variety suggests that people are not only moving food, they are moving skills. They are moving the ability to rebuild. Most historians agree that households rely on tools and craft knowledge. and archaeology suggests that many everyday tools are portable. One interpretation is that when people carry tools rather than leaving them, it implies planned relocation rather than sudden flight. A more cautious explanation could be that tools are valuable and always kept close. True. Still, the clustering pattern suggests multiple households acting at once. Historians still argue whether large-scale movements in ancient Mesopotamia are best explained by environmental pressures like flooding and salinization, or by political shifts, conflict, and changing trade networks, or by a blend that cannot be separated cleanly. You let that debate hover above the water like mist. Then you focus on what you can observe in the scene. A boat is pushed gently off the bank, not launched dramatically, just nudged until it floats. A man steadies it with a pole. Another person climbs in and sits low, keeping their weight centered. A child is handed in, sleepy and quiet. A basket follows, then a jar, then a bundle of cloth. Each item enters the boat like a word in a sentence. The sentence being written is calm. Nearby, another boat is being prepared differently. Instead of mixed household goods, it is loaded with flat baskets of grain. The baskets are sealed with clay and covered with reeds. The grain boat sits lower in the water. The boat builder watches it with a serious face. Grain is heavy. Grain shifts if it is not packed well. Grain absorbs water if it is not sealed. The builder tests the load balance again. This is a new development, specialization. Some boats carry people. Some carry food. Some might carry records. This suggests a plan larger than one family. It suggests roles. A fringe idea proposes that ancient communities could organize departures with surprising sophistication, assigning transport tasks the way a modern town might organize emergency supplies. This theory isn't widely accepted as a documented fact for a specific event. But it is not unreasonable that organized institutions could coordinate labor and transport when needed, if we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion. You can imagine temple administrators or local leaders quietly arranging who carries what. You watch a man press a seal into a small lump of clay on a basket lid. The seal impression is crisp. It marks ownership, authorization, responsibility. Most historians agree that sealing practices support administration and prevent tampering. The evidence we do have points to seals used on goods in transit. The new development here is the number of seals being used in quick succession, as if many items need official marking before they move. A woman brings a small clay tablet wrapped in cloth and places it in a basket, then sets the basket near a boat. Tablets are fragile but durable if fired, and they can survive floods if they end up buried. Still, people wouldn't casually leave important records behind if they expect to rebuild. One interpretation is that moving tablets suggests intentional preservation of identity and obligations. A more cautious explanation could be that the tablet is a personal letter, a contract, or a receipt, something valuable, but not necessarily part of a grand plan. Both possibilities can sit side by side. You move to the edge of the bank where workers have built a simple ramp of packed earth to make loading easier. The ramp looks freshly smoothed. Someone has sprinkled sand or crushed reed on it to reduce slipping. This is another new development: infrastructure for movement. It suggests repeated trips, not a single hurried load. It suggests people expect to carry many items down to the water and return for more. A gentle joke floats by as you watch someone slip slightly on the ramp and catch themselves. You imagine them whispering, "If I fall in now, I will become part of the legend, the one who tested the water early, and nobody wants that." They steady themselves, glance around to make sure no one saw, and continue like nothing happened. Ancient dignity is very much like modern dignity, delicate and easily threatened by gravity. You look out over the water and see faint shapes moving, boats drifting quietly along the channel. There is no chorus of oars. There are poles dipping softly. The boats keep to the calmer parts of the water, avoiding the center where current might be stronger. A more cautious explanation could be that night travel is common to avoid heat and to move goods efficiently. Yes, but the pattern of multiple boats moving in the same direction, spaced out, quiet, feels like coordination rather than coincidence. The boat builder returns to his work and adds one more layer of bitumen to a seam, smoothing it until it looks almost polished. He sits back and exhales. The lamplight reflects off the wet sealant, and it looks like a dark mirror. You see your own imagined face in it for a moment, and it feels like a reminder that survival is always personal, even when it is communal. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is that boats, bitumen, rope, and river transport are central to Mesopotamian life. The interpreted part is that the scale and organization of preparation could reflect readiness for disruption. The imagined part is the logistics of vanishing. Boats assigned roles, goods sealed and staged, ramps built for repeated loading, all happening in near silence. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. And as you breathe in that heavy bitumen scent and listen to the soft dip of poles in dark water, you feel the calm possibility that sometimes the most dramatic human act is not fighting the flood, but quietly arranging not to be there when it arrives. You drift inland to a neighborhood where the air smells less like bitumen and more like dry plaster, old smoke, and the faint sweetness of dates stored in clay jars. The streets here are narrow, and the night feels intimate, as if every wall is close enough to hear you breathe. A few lamps burn behind door curtains, but many doorways are dark. The darkness does not feel abandoned in a dramatic way. It feels intentional, like a city, learning how to disappear softly. The evidence we do have points to Mesopotamian cities built largely of mud brick, with houses clustered tightly and rebuilt repeatedly over time. Archaeology suggests that many sites contain layers of occupation, rebuilding, and sometimes sudden changes, including flood deposits or shifts in material culture. Most historians agree that abandonment and reoccupation happen for many reasons, including environmental stress, political change, and economic shifts. This is the documented anchor. Tonight, the mystery angle lives in the quieter question of how leaving can look like nothing at all. You step into a small courtyard where a house stands with its door partially open. Inside, moonlight falls across a low bench and a few storage jars. The jars remain, but they are not full. You can tell by the way the lids sit slightly crooked, and by the way The inside smells more like old dust than fresh grain. A more cautious explanation could be that the household simply used its supplies. Another interpretation is that supplies have been removed. The absence of weight is a kind of presence. You move deeper inside, careful not to trip over a sleeping dog that is not actually sleeping, just pretending to be asleep because it would rather not deal with you. The dog opens one eye and closes it again, as if filing a complaint with the universe. You smile in your mind. Even in ancient cities, the dog is always the unofficial security system, mostly fueled by boredom. On the wall you see a few reed mats rolled and tied, not spread out for sleeping. A clay lamp sits empty, its wick pulled. A small wooden peg has no cloak hanging from it. These details are tiny, but they stack up. Archaeology often captures what is left behind, not what is carried away. One interpretation is that when portable items are missing while heavier items remain, it may suggest planned departure. A more cautious explanation could be that portable items are simply less likely to survive, or that they were removed later by others. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. You step out into the street and notice something similar in the neighboring house. The door is shut, but the latch is not sealed. Sealing a door with clay can signal closure or protection. Here, the door is shut in a way that feels temporary, like someone expects to return, or at least wants the door to look normal. The city's surface is being kept calm. Most historians agree that people often respond to danger by trying to preserve normality, because normality reduces panic. One interpretation is that a silent evacuation would require exactly this: keeping the streets quiet, keeping the doors appearing ordinary, moving in small groups, leaving no dramatic signs. The cinematic what-if slips in gently. What if the real message of some flood traditions is not heroic survival on a single boat, but the mundane genius of leaving early and leaving quietly? You walk toward a small potter's yard. Pots are stacked, some finished, some half-dried. A kiln is cold. The ground is swept clean, unusually clean for a work yard. You notice a scatter of broken shards near a corner, as if someone dropped something in haste and did not bother to clean it up. That small mess feels like evidence of speed, but you keep your tone careful. It's possible the shards are from any ordinary accident. Still, you can feel how archaeology might read such patterns. Where there is order, there is mess. Where there is sudden change, where there is continuity. Historians still argue whether certain destruction layers and abandonment episodes at Mesopotamian sites reflect primarily warfare, flooding, economic collapse, or gradual relocation. Because the material evidence can be ambiguous. You hold that ambiguity gently, like a cup of warm water you do not want to spill. You continue walking and come to a spot where the street dips slightly, a low point that would gather water if rain fell or if a canal overflowed. Here, the smell is damp even though the night is dry. You see dark stains on the lower bricks, watermarks that suggest recent wetness. The evidence we do have points to frequent interactions between built space and water, and in a flood-prone landscape, low points become warnings. A child's toy lies near a doorway, a simple clay animal, chipped. The toy is left behind. That detail feels tender and unsettling, because toys are usually cherished. One interpretation is that the toy was forgotten in the rush. Another is that the child has grown or moved on and the toy is discarded. But in the mood of this night, it feels like a dropped thread from a larger fabric. A light joke rises softly, because your mind refuses to be only serious. You imagine an adult saying, "We are leaving quietly. Remember." And the child says, "Okay, but I am bringing my clay goat." And the adult says, "Yes, fine. Bring the clay goat." The clay goat is officially part of the plan. And then the clay goat still gets left behind because children are masters of losing things. The joke lands gently and fades. You step into another house that feels more official, perhaps the home of an administrator or a craft leader. There are shelves with tablets, or at least places where tablets should be. The shelves are mostly empty. A single tablet remains, not hidden, simply left. It might be a school exercise, a practice piece, something not worth carrying. This is a new development, selective leaving. Not everything is taken, only what matters most. Most historians agree that written records are valuable in administrative societies, but not every tablet is equally important. The evidence we do have points to many school exercises and routine accounts that could be discarded, while contracts, lists, and seals would be more precious. One interpretation is that selective removal hints at planning. A more cautious explanation could be that tablets are moved for many reasons, including archiving, reuse, or redistribution. Still, the emptiness feels purposeful. Outside, you notice a few people moving in the shadows. They are not carrying huge loads. They carry small bundles, close to the body, wrapped in cloth. Their steps are careful, and they avoid the low points in the street. They move like they know where water collects. They do not speak. They pass by you as if you are a dream, and you let them pass without trying to stop them, because this is not a chase story. This is a slow, calm observation. You reach a wider lane where a city wall is visible, a long line of mud brick that defines an edge. Near the wall, there is a gate, not crowded, just attended. A guard stands with a spear, not aggressive, just present. Most historians agree that city walls and gates are common features, and that movement through them can be controlled. One interpretation is that controlled gates could enable an orderly departure, letting people leave in small groups. Another interpretation is that gates are watched simply for security. Both can be true. You watch the guard's posture. He is not tense. He looks bored in the way someone looks bored when nothing surprising is supposed to happen. Which is interesting, because something is happening. People pass through, not in a flood of bodies, but in a steady trickle. The guard does not question them loudly. He gives a small nod. A person shows a seal impression on a small clay tag. The guard nods again. This is another new development, authorization for movement. It suggests some level of coordination. A fringe idea proposes that some ancient evacuations, if they occurred, were managed through administrative tags and seals, allowing households to move goods legally and without conflict. This theory isn't widely accepted as a documented event, but it matches the known use of seals for regulating goods and identity. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes a plausible mechanism for quiet order. Beyond the gate, the ground rises slightly. You step onto firmer earth. The air smells different, more open, less smoky. You look back at the city, and it doesn't look destroyed. it looks asleep. That is the eerie thing. In many stories, disaster is loud. Here, the new development is the absence of loudness. A city can be empty and still standing. Walls can remain while voices leave. Archaeology suggests that some sites show abrupt changes and gaps in occupation that can be difficult to interpret. The evidence we do have points to both sudden disruptions and gradual shifts. One interpretation is that a silent evacuation would leave a particular archaeological signature, a reduction in portable goods left behind, intact structures, fewer signs of violent destruction, and a sudden thinning of daily debris. A more cautious explanation could be that later reuse, erosion, and excavation bias complicate these patterns. True, the ground keeps secrets and also mixes them. You walk along a path outside the wall where reeds grow thick. You hear insects. You hear the distant croak of frogs. You smell dampness. The land here feels like it could become water quickly. And you understand why higher ground matters. People move toward firmness the way you move toward warmth when you are cold. Historians still argue whether certain ancient flood deposits represent regional catastrophes or localized events, and whether cultural memory amplifies localized disasters into universal stories. You let that debate be a soft cloud above your head. You keep walking and notice small markers along the path. Stones placed at intervals, perhaps to guide travelers at night. The stones are not large. They are just enough to catch a foot or reflect a hint of moonlight. This is another new development. A route. Not a random wandering, but a known way out. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is that Mesopotamian cities show layers, gaps, and evidence of floods and shifts, and that portable goods are often missing when people move. The interpreted part is that selective removal and intact structures might suggest intentional departure in some cases. The imagined part is a city that fades by design, households leaving quietly with only what matters, gates regulating movement with nods and seals, and a route marked by stones toward higher ground. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. And as you step into the reed-lined dark outside the walls, you feel the calm power of absence, the way a place can speak most loudly by what is no longer there. You walk into a landscape that feels wide and open, where the city's walls are no longer the main horizon and the sky takes over as the largest architecture. The ground underfoot is firm in places and springy in others, with patches of salt-crusted earth that crunch softly when you step. A faint breeze moves through reeds and grasses, and the sound is like a whispering audience that never claps, only listens. Most historians agree that Mesopotamians pay close attention to celestial patterns, and that over time they develop sophisticated systems of observing the sky, tracking lunar cycles, and interpreting omens. Archaeology suggests that the sky plays a practical role as well, because cycles help regulate agriculture, ritual calendars, and administrative timing. The evidence we do have points to a culture where stars and signs are woven into decision-making, even when the exact forms of early observation are harder to pin down. That is the documented anchor. The interpretation angle is that watching the heavens can also be a way to talk about risk without saying the risky thing out loud. You reach a low rise where a small platform has been built, Not grand, just a raised patch of packed earth with a reed shelter. Inside, a watcher sits with a bowl of water and a bundle of reeds that might be used as a pointer. He's not dressed like a king. He's dressed like a person whose job is patience. His eyes move between the sky and a clay tablet resting near his knee. The tablet could be a note, a list, or a record of observations. It could also be something else entirely. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. Still, the presence of a tablet suggests that what he watches matters enough to be remembered. He points toward the horizon where the moon hangs low, pale and steady. He traces a line with his reed pointer as if aligning the moon with a distant mark. Most historians agree that lunar observation becomes central to Mesopotamian calendrical systems. One interpretation is that the moon's phases are not just timekeeping, but reassurance, because the moon returns even when rivers misbehave. Another interpretation is that careful observers might notice seasonal patterns that correlate with flooding risk, such as the timing of snowmelt upstream, though the full hydrological understanding would not be modern. A popular rumor claims that ancient priests could predict floods purely by reading the stars. This theory isn't widely accepted in a supernatural sense, but it is reasonable that skilled observers could combine sky cycles with local environmental cues to anticipate dangerous seasons. If we treat it as a possibility, rather than a conclusion, the sky becomes a calendar of caution rather than a crystal ball. You look up, the stars are sharp points, and you can see the milky haze of distant light across the sky. The watcher murmurs a name under his breath, perhaps a star, perhaps a deity, perhaps both. In Mesopotamian thought, the boundary between star and god can be thin. Most historians agree that celestial bodies are often associated with divine figures. One interpretation is that this association makes observation feel sacred, which encourages discipline. If your work is holy, you do it carefully. The watcher lifts the bowl of water and tilts it slightly, watching how the moon reflects on its surface. The reflection wavers with the slightest movement, and you realize how fragile perception can be. A careful reading might suggest that divination methods sometimes use reflections, not because they reveal magic, but because they train attention. You learn to notice tiny shifts. That skill can be useful when watching rivers too. Historians still argue whether omen texts and sky interpretations were primarily used to support political authority, to guide practical decisions, or to provide psychological comfort during uncertain times. You feel the calm weight of that debate. Sky watching can be all of those things. It can help kings justify actions. It can help farmers time planting. It can help communities feel less helpless. Tonight, it feels like a language for coordination. Instead of saying, "The water might rise," a priest might say, "The signs suggest caution." Instead of announcing, "We should move supplies," an administrator might say, "Prepare for the turning of the month." You walk down from the platform and find a small group gathered at the edge of the rise. They stand in a loose semicircle, faces tilted upward. One person holds a small lamp with the flame covered, so it does not interfere with the darkness needed for viewing. Another holds a reed stylus and a lump of clay, ready to record. Their mood is serious, but not fearful. It feels like listening to weather. A leader in the group speaks softly, He does not claim certainty. He uses cautious language, the kind that keeps credibility. He says the patterns might suggest a shift. He says it's possible the season will be heavy. He says a more cautious explanation could be that nothing unusual happens. But preparation is wise. You appreciate that tone. It is the tone of a community that has learned not to gamble with water. The cinematic what if arrives gently, like a blanket settling. What if the night sky becomes the final timetable for departure? Not because stars command people, but because the sky offers a shared schedule everyone can agree on. When the moon reaches a certain phase, you check the dikes. When a certain constellation rises, you seal extra jars. When the month turns, you move the most vulnerable households first. This is imagined, clearly framed as possibility. But it fits the human need for coordinated timing. You wander among the group and notice small objects at their feet. A bundle of reeds tied neatly, a small jar sealed with clay, a folded cloth. These are practical items. They are not magical tools. Their presence suggests the watchers are not only watching, they are ready to act. This is a new development, observation linked to provisioning. Knowledge is not just stored, it is used. A light joke drifts in, because your mind cannot resist. You imagine someone staring at the sky for hours, and then finally saying, "I have an announcement. The stars say it is bedtime." And everyone nods because the stars are always right about bedtime. The humor is gentle, and it keeps the air from becoming too heavy. The leader asks one person to go quietly to another part of the camp, perhaps to inform a household, perhaps to pass a message. The messenger walks away without hurry, but with purpose. This is another new development. Communication. Not a dramatic proclamation, just a whispered chain. Most historians agree that information networks in ancient societies depend on personal communication, messengers, and institutional channels. One interpretation is that priests and administrators could spread guidance through ritual gatherings, market days, and household networks. A more cautious explanation could be that small groups simply share their concerns naturally. Either way, the effect is the same. People hear and adjust. You look toward the riverlands. In the distance, you can see a faint sheen of water reflecting starlight. The sheen seems broader than it should, spreading into areas that look like fields. You do not claim it is flooding now. You only say it looks wet, and in a river world, wetness at the wrong time can be a warning. The group notices it too. No one panics. They watch longer. They speak even more softly, as if sound could disturb the water. A fringe idea proposes that certain omen phrases in ancient texts are coded instructions, not predictions, but prearranged signals that leaders use to coordinate actions quietly. This theory isn't widely accepted, and it can easily be overstated. Still, if we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it offers an intriguing mechanism. A phrase that sounds religious could double as a practical alert. A ritual gathering could double as a planning meeting. A chant could double as a checklist. The leader closes his eyes for a moment, then opens them and speaks again. He says they should check the storage in the morning, but the way he says morning is interesting. It is not casual. It sounds like a deadline. He says the most vulnerable should be ready to move if needed. He does not say flee. He says ready. That single word changes everything. Ready is calm. Ready is controlled. Historians still argue whether the prominence of omens in Mesopotamian culture reflects deep superstition, disciplined empirical observation, or a blended worldview where spiritual and practical thinking cannot be separated. You feel the wisdom in that blending. Humans do not think in neat categories. They think in stories. They think in signs. They think in routines. And routines can save you. You walk away from the group and follow a path along the rise. The ground is sprinkled with small stones that reflect moonlight. You hear a low murmur from somewhere below. Perhaps people settling. Perhaps someone reciting a prayer. You smell smoke carried faintly on the wind. A dog barks once, then stops, as if reminded to be polite. You reach a spot where a small marker stands, a carved post or stone, used perhaps as a boundary or a reference point. Someone has tied a strip of cloth to it. The cloth flutters softly. This is a new development, a signal you can see in the dark. It might mark a route. It might mark a meeting point. It might be nothing more than a personal gesture. But in the mood of this night, it feels like the kind of quiet sign people leave for each other when words are risky. Some part are documented, some are interpretation, and some a gentle imagination. The documented part is that Mesopotamians observe the sky, use lunar calendars, and interpret omens, and that celestial patterns shape social timing. The interpreted part is that omen language could serve practical coordination as well as spiritual meaning. The imagined part is a sky-based timetable and coded phrasing that allows a community to prepare in calm secrecy, with messengers and small visible markers guiding movement. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. And as you breathe in cool night air and watch the moon steady itself above the riverlands, you feel the quiet power of shared timing, the way a community can move together without shouting, simply by agreeing on where to look and when. You walk toward a place where the land rises just enough to feel safe, a gentle swell of earth that lifts your feet out of the marshy breath of the lowlands. The air is cooler here, and it carries a clean scent, dry grass, faint smoke, and the mineral bite of soil that has not been soaked recently. The night feels wider, calmer, as if the world has made room for you to rest. Below, in the distance, the riverlands shimmer with a faint sheen that could be ordinary wet ground, or could be the beginning of something larger. You do not force the meaning. You let it be a possibility. Most historians agree that ancient societies rebuild after disasters, and that in Mesopotamia the long story of cities includes cycles of growth, damage, repair, and transformation. Archaeology suggests that settlements shift over time, sometimes moving slightly, sometimes relocating more dramatically, influenced by watercourses, soil conditions, and political realities. The evidence we do have points to resilience, not as a heroic slogan, but as a routine practice. People remaking homes out of the same clay again and again. On this higher ground, you find small shelters made of reeds and cloth, temporary structures that look like they can be assembled and disassembled without fuss. A few families sit close together, not in a panic huddle, but in a calm arrangement that says, "We are waiting. A pot of water warms near a small fire, and the steam rises and vanishes into the night. A child chews on a piece of dried bread and watches the stars like they are the most boring and comforting thing in the world. One interpretation is that people who live with rivers develop an instinct for moving to higher ground as a precaution, and that temporary camps could form during risky seasons. A more cautious explanation could be that such camps also form for herding, hunting, trade stops, or ritual gatherings. Both are possible, and the landscape allows many reasons for people to be out here. But tonight, the mood suggests a particular kind of waiting. The waiting that happens when you have packed the essentials, and now you listen. Historians still argue whether the great flood tales are best tied to a single event, a series of regional disasters, or a blended cultural memory that grows larger as it is retold. That debate stays with you like a soft echo, because it keeps you honest. You do not need a single answer to feel the human reality beneath it. People in floodlands watch water. They plan. They move. They remember. You sit near a small group of elders who speak quietly. They do not talk about doom. They talk about practical matters. Where the good ground is, which path stays firm after rain, which reeds are best for roofing, who has a spare net, who needs extra water. Their conversation is the kind of conversation that builds a future, even if it is happening at midnight. Most historians agree that community knowledge and cooperation are essential in ancient societies. And the evidence we do have points to collective labor and shared infrastructure. Here, on higher ground, that cooperation becomes visible in its simplest form. People helping people, because it is the only way to stay steady. A man walks between shelters carrying a small clay jar sealed with an impression. He hands it to another adult and receives a nod in return. The exchange is quiet, almost ceremonial. It might be food, it might be oil. It might be a record of some kind. The exact content is unknown, so you keep it gentle. Still, the act of exchanging sealed goods suggests organization even in a temporary camp. One interpretation is that institutions do not vanish when people move. They travel in the form of habits, seals, lists, and routines. A light joke drifts in, because your mind wants to keep you relaxed. You imagine someone trying to be official out here, like, please sign this clay tablet, acknowledging receipt of 1 jar. And the other person is like, sir, we are sitting on a hill in the dark. I am not doing paperwork. Then they do it anyway, because the urge to document is eternal. The joke lands softly and fades into the night air. You walk to the edge of the rise and look down at the riverlands again. The moonlight makes water look like polished stone. You see a line where reeds meet open, wet ground, and you can imagine how easily that line could change. The cinematic what if arrives gently. What if the most important part of the flood narrative is not the flood itself, but the decision point before it, the moment when a community chooses to trust its preparations, not because they are certain, but because uncertainty is exactly why preparation exists. Most historians agree that myths often serve as moral and social frameworks. And in Mesopotamia, flood stories can convey themes of divine will, human noise, justice, and survival. One interpretation is that these stories also encode a lesson in timing. That action taken early is calmer and more effective than action taken late. A more cautious explanation could be that the lesson is purely moral rather than practical. But humans rarely separate morals from logistics. If you believe the gods value order, you might keep your household ordered. If you believe warnings matter, you might listen sooner. In the camp, a priest or ritual leader stands near a small fire and speaks a short blessing. He does not perform grand gestures. He does not predict. He says words that sound like reassurance and reminder. The people listen, not with fear, but with the calm attention you give to something familiar. Most historians agree that ritual can create social cohesion, and the evidence we do have points to religion integrated with daily life. One interpretation is that ritual language helps people tolerate waiting, because waiting is hard. Waiting is a kind of courage. A popular rumor claims that some ancient groups left deliberately to start over, treating disasters as opportunities to reset society elsewhere. This theory isn't widely accepted as a universal pattern, but it has a grain of plausibility in the sense that migration and relocation happen throughout history. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, you can imagine families deciding that even if the flood does not come, a move might still be worthwhile, because land changes, politics change, canals silt up, and sometimes the best future is found by shifting a little. You walk among the shelters and see small signs of comfort. A woven mat arranged carefully, a blanket folded, a jar positioned where it will not tip, a reed screen set to block wind. These details are intimate. They suggest people expect to sleep here, not to flee further in the night. This is another new development, settling. Preparedness does not always mean continuous movement. Sometimes preparedness means choosing a safe place and resting. Most historians agree that after disasters, communities often rebuild in familiar patterns, carrying cultural habits into new contexts. Archaeology suggests continuity in craft styles and administrative practices even when settlements shift. The evidence we do have points to humans keeping what they can: recipes, stories, tools, rituals, and passing them forward. This is where memory becomes a kind of shelter. Even if a city changes, the way you bake bread can stay the same. The way you seal a jar can stay the same. The way you tell a flood story can stay the same. And in that sameness, there is comfort. Historians still argue whether the resilience of Mesopotamian societies comes primarily from centralized institutions like temples and palaces, or from decentralized household knowledge and local cooperation, or from both working together. You do not need to choose one answer to feel the calm truth that both matter. Institutions can store grain. Households can store skills. Temples can coordinate labor. Families can carry memory. Together, they make survival less lonely. Now the night begins to slow, not because time stops, but because your attention softens. The camp quiets. Conversations become murmurs. Someone stirs a pot and then stops. A baby makes a small sound and then settles. The wind moves through the reeds with a steady hush. You feel the world become simpler, reduced to essentials: breath, warmth, shelter, shared silence. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is that Mesopotamian societies live with floods, rebuild, and preserve stories and practices over long stretches of time. The interpreted part is that flood narratives may reflect practical lessons about timing, coordination, and preparedness, even if we cannot pin them to a single event. The imagined part is a quiet camp on higher ground, where people choose to rest, to wait, and to carry their identity in small objects and steady routines. And now, you let the mystery soften. You do not need a secret answer. You do not need a hidden code. You only need the feeling of human beings doing what human beings have always done, listening to the world, preparing with care, and finding calm places to sleep when the ground feels safe enough. Your breathing slows. The air cools against your skin. The sounds of the camp blur into a single gentle hum, like a fan in the corner of a quiet room. The moon holds steady above the riverlands, and whether the water rises tomorrow or not is a question you do not have to solve tonight. You can let the uncertainty float away. You can let the mind unclench. You can let the past become a soft landscape you visited, and now leave behind without urgency. You picture the simplest objects, a sealed jar, a folded cloth, a rolled reed mat, and you feel how they represent something tender. They represent the idea that survival is not loud. Survival is a plan made of small actions. Survival is a community that knows when to move and when to rest. Survival is remembering what matters and letting the rest wash away. The wind eases. The fire becomes embers. The embers glow like tiny stars on the ground. The people around you settle into sleep, and you settle with them, letting your thoughts slow down until they are barely thoughts at all. Just warmth and darkness and the steady comfort of being safe in a story. End of script. Sweet dreams.